Welcome back, everyone. In this video, our goal is to explore the landscape deformation settings available when you've got a spline selected. Now with these, you can set rules regarding if the terrain under a spline is allowed to automatically fill in underneath your spline. Now we can also determine if we'll automatically apply landscape painting directly beneath our spline as well. And that's pretty cool. Now, what are we talking about here, these landscape deformation settings? Well, firstly, here I am in my splines level underneath my landscape editing mode. I've got my manage tab selected and I've got the edit splines tool selected over here. And of course, I've got my splines layer selected. And we can see that with a spline control point here selected in my level, over in the details panel, we've got these parameters right here called landscape deformation. This is what we're going to be talking about in this one, as well as if you check over in the modes panel, we've got a few different tool settings here, and we see the words deform and landscapes. We're going to be covering a couple of these in this video as well. All right, for starters here, check out that I've got one control point selected here in my landscape spline. And with that selected, you can see over in the details panel, I do have access to my landscape deformation checkboxes here, the raise and lowering of the terrain. That doesn't matter if I have one control point selected or if I select all control points by clicking on that button, those parameters are available. However, these parameters don't really matter for whether or not the landscape is going to deform underneath our landscape spline. What it really matters for is if we have these checked on or off for our segments. So now I'm going to select one segment in my landscape spline. You can see I've still got access to these landscape deformation checkboxes to raise and lower the terrain. It doesn't matter if I have one segment or all segments selected here, I do have access to them. Now, currently they are checked on, meaning that when I move this landscape spline up or down, I want the terrain underneath it to deform automatically. However, there's going to be a problem that I'm going to expose here in just a moment. So, what I'm going to do is I am going to uncheck my raise terrain here with all of my segments selected. So make sure you've got all segments selected. Segments, very important. And we're going to uncheck raise terrain. So the landscape should not deform automatically. Now I'm going to select all my control points so that I can raise up my landscape spline here all together. I'm going to tap the space bar once to bring out my little movement widget here. And now I said that all landscape splines segments should not automatically deform when I move this up. However, I'm going to be exposing a problem here. So dragging it up, dragging it up, dragging it up. And as I release, it deformed underneath it. Well, what just happened? I thought you said with all segments selected here, and I just clicked that box, that we were not going to automatically raise the terrain. Well, the problem here resides with the fact that I've currently got my base layer on top of my splines layer, meaning my base layer is still deforming and it's showing that deformation. However, if I reorder my levels here, my layers I should say, not levels, I'm going to drag my splines layer, left click and drag on top of my base layer, and now what you'll see is it does not show a raising up of the landscape to meet my spline. So let me go ahead and select a segment here. And let me go ahead and choose to raise the terrain now for this particular segment. You can notice that I've just got one segment selected. Or if I select all my segments, I can say, yes, let's raise it up for all of them. Boom. Now, a few things to note as you're working your way through this. Again, make sure you've got your splines layer on top. And again, make sure that you are modifying your segment raising and lowering terrain checkboxes. But beyond that, there's also some other things to keep in mind here. I'm going to select all of my segments here, and I'm going to uncheck my lowering of the terrain, which means that I don't want my landscape to automatically deform if I lower my landscape spline here. So let's see what happens now if I select all of my control points. I've got them all selected here. I'm just going, in fact, let me just select one control point. I don't have to select all of them. Going to press the space bar, and now I'm just going to move this one down just a little bit. And it did deform. Well, what just happened there? I thought we just said that we didn't want to deform if we lowered the terrain. Well, if I move this all the way down, I'm going to move it significantly down, you can see that it does lower it, but only to the base level. It did not lower it automatically once I sunk below that base level. So that's something to keep in mind as you're working your way through this stuff. Just because you say, I don't want it to go lower, doesn't mean it can't go lower. It just means it's not going to go lower below that base threshold. All right, so let me go ahead and raise that back up. I'm going to select all my segments once again. I'm going to say, yes, we are going to allow you to deform automatically if we lower the terrain as well. Okay, now let's talk about these landscape layer names. Currently it says none, 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 none for every single segment we've got selected here. Now these are cool because they're going to allow us to specify a type of layer we want to paint underneath the surface of our spline, such as dirt or gravel or whatever we want, whenever we deform this up or down. So I'm going to put in a layer name here, and I'm going to put in the layer name of rock. Now a couple things to keep in mind here. If you want to see this magic happen, you've got to have the exact name, if I jump on over to landscape paint mode here, that we have for one of our different paint layers here, and I do have one called rock. Also, we got to make sure that we've got some landscape layer info object for that particular layer as well. Now, if I go to move a few of my control points here, and let me just go back to my manage mode. And I'm going to select all my control points here and just maybe move this on up just a little bit. And now let me jump back to my paint mode. You'll be like, where is the rock? I don't see any rock. Well, if I take my base layer here back in landscape paint mode and I change my alpha from 1, and I'm just going to slide this on back to say 0.1. And now you can see I've got a bunch of red here because I am currently back in paint mode. Let me jump back to manage mode. Now you can see I've got a little bit of a rock layer that is more exposed underneath it. Now rock and this is all snow out here are probably a little bit too closely related. So let me just jump back into my settings here. I've got a control point selected. Let me select all of my segments. And I'm going to change this from rock to, let's go, maybe something more drastic like grass, yeah? And now you can see we've got grass appearing underneath our landscape spline as well. So that's kind of a cool way to make it so that you don't have to manually paint right underneath there. Some other things to note if you're going to paint your landscape layers in such a fashion is that if you got your control points selected here, and I got that by just going to select all connected control points, you've got a few parameters here that you can play with, one of them being width and another being side fall off. If I was to adjust the width here of my landscape spline, I'll say maybe 3,000. And let me, wow, that was kind of crazy. Let me just undo that quickly. Let me change my side fall off. Actually, I'm going to go with that to be 3,000. Maybe that'll be a better demonstration. That is a better demonstration right there. You can see how that kind of fans out that particular layer underneath it. So it's not quite so sharp. Now, obviously, a perfect example as to when you might want to do something like this is if you got a road like this and maybe you just wanted to have some gravel underneath it. If you look out at roads in your everyday life, it's usually a road on top of gravel. And actually, I'm just going to select one control point here, and I'm going to adjust the width of this one control point like that, make that kind of fat there. You can see how it automatically adjusts there as well, the painting underneath, if you modify just a single control point to be more skinny or fat. And finally, before we wrap this up, what about these deform landscape to spline buttons over in our tool settings? Well, these only come into play when you don't have the layer system enabled for your landscape. So in order to show these off, what I need to do is I need to jump back into place mode. I need to select my landscape actor. I need to undo enable edit layers. So I'm gonna uncheck that, and I will break our layers here. Yes. Oh, sad day. And jump back over to our landscape mode here. Again, we've got the manage tab selected over here. Make sure you've got edit splines selected over here. And now, if I was to raise up a single control point, pressing the space bar, gonna raise that up, you're gonna see nothing has filled in automatically. So now I'm going to select all of my segments here over in the details panel. And now the way to get this to raise up to fill in underneath is by clicking this only selected button. So I click that, it will fill up, but it's only going to fill in for my currently selected spline. Now, I could fill this in for all splines. So let me kind of re-demonstrate this by having a control point selected here. I'm going to raise this one up. Nothing is filled in yet. And now I've got this fence spline over here. I'm going to raise up a control point here and here and here. Now, if I come back here and select my one control point, and now I choose to select all segments. Now, and I'm going to try to frame it so you can see that there and this gap right here. If I click all splines, you can see it's now filled in over here, but over there as well. So there you have it, guys. Some controls on how you can deform your landscape automatically to fill in underneath your splines, whether or not you've got the layer system enabled or not, and whether or not you want it to automatically fill in if you've got your control points raised up or going below the base level of your landscape actor here as well. Guys, that is going to do it all for this one. We will see you in the next one.